Welcome, everybody. As you're joining us, I'll just give a couple quick words of introduction before turning things over to the MPO's Executive Director, Tegan Tyke. My name is Michelle Scott. I'm a member of Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO staff. I do want to remind everyone, you should have seen the message that this meeting today is being recorded and it will be later made available on the MPO's YouTube page as well as the MPO website. So now at this point, I'll turn things over to Tegan Tyke, MPO Executive Director.
It's Michelle, and hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth pilot Transit Working Group meeting, which is hosted by the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, or Boston Region MPO. And as Michelle said, I'm Tegan Tyke. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Transportation Planning staff to the Boston Region MPO. So hopefully many of you are familiar with us, but just in case there are new folks in the room, we do have two primary roles as staff to the MPO. We both support the MPO in realizing their vision of a transportation system with all the excellent features of being sustainable, healthy, equitable, robust, economically viable. And then we also play a role in providing technical and planning support and work to various partners in the region, including agencies like the MBTA, MassDOT, regional transit authorities, and municipalities, among others. So that is us. And if you'd like to learn more, we do have a frequently asked questions or FAQ page on our website. And that gives a little bit more background on the MPO and CTPS as staff to the MPO. And I believe we'll be sharing the link to that FAQ page. And then as a reminder, as I said at the beginning, this is still considered a pilot working group forum. And the goal is to convene transit providers in the Boston region in a way that we're also supporting coordination between transit providers. And it's also intended to build stronger connections between those transit providers and other transit stakeholders in the region with the MPO itself. So again, more information is available on our website about this working group, and that link also, I hope, will be shared in the chat. So it is our hope that we are gathering a wide range of folks in these forums, including providers and stakeholders. So if you all could take a moment, please, and introduce yourself through the chat. So through the chat, I think Rushine got both of the links out. If you could now add your name and affiliation if you have one, and then where you are located or where your transit service is located if you're representing a transit service. And if as I speak, everybody can just sort of start to plug that information into the chat box. Good, I see it starting. And that just, it gives everyone a reference you can kind of skim through and see where people are from. And please also feel free to put your affiliation in your name in the Zoom window so that people can see it there too. Great, thank you everyone for starting to do that. So before passing it back to staff, to Michelle and other staff, I'd like to have an opportunity to set a little bit of context for these conversations. And in this case, I think we'll be talking about, I hope for you, another very interesting topic. I would say that it takes a wide range of folks, which I hope many of whom are here today, to work together to think about addressing transportation challenges. And this has become, of course, even more important in the context of the uncertainties and impacts resulting from the pandemic. And so the idea with this group, and I guess in our transportation work in general, is that we need to be thinking and talking together about how we advance public transit as the foundation of an equitable, sustainable, safe, and robust transportation system that meets the region's goals, even in the context of these uncertainty and challenges. So this isn't just a forum to discuss challenges, but also to talk about how we can work together to meet future needs, how we can actually shape that future in a way that supports the goals we have in the region of having a sustainable and equitable transportation system and region. So today, we'll be hearing about what I think is a really excellent example of thinking about the future. And MBTA and Keolis representatives will be talking to us today about their new approach for scheduling regional rail service, as well as about the thinking around future regional rail transformation. So I find this a really fascinating and exciting topic. I want to highlight just a couple of ways in which the MPO and CTPS staff are sort of linked with the MBTA in this initiative. I think it's nice to point out that MBTA is a board member that sits on the MPO, and the MPO is the body that approves allocation of federal dollars. In the MBTA's case, the MBTA determines its capital priorities, and the board has an opportunity to sort of ask questions and provide final approval for those federal dollars. We also, as staff at the MPO, have provided a lot of data and analytical support for the MBTA, and specifically for the regional rail work, the Rail Vision study, we provided some technical assistance and modeling support for that study. And that included an analysis of the equity implications of the potential future regional rail alternatives. So this is exciting for us, as I hope it is exciting for you. And you'll also hear from staff today about a recently released dashboard that displays data about park and ride and bicycle parking availability and use in your MBTA stations, which we think kind of goes along nicely with this idea of having good access and amenities in the region to transit, including regional rail. So with that context setting, I'll turn it back over to Michelle. And she is one of our chief transportation planners that is supporting the Boston Region MPO, and she will be facilitating this meeting as she has those in the past. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Tegan. Before saying more, I'd like to check in with my colleague, Kate White, to get a sense of who's in the room with us today.
Well, thanks, Michelle. We have a variety of transit providers, transit advocates, and city and town staff.
All right, that's really exciting. Tegan gave a bit of a refresher on this group, which is meant not only to connect transit providers with one another and with other folks working in the transit space, but also to share information about the transit-related work that the MPO does, in terms of making investments or providing technical assistance that may be of support to transit providers and others in the region. So before we launch into the agenda, I just want to give a quick overview of some of the things you'll hear about today. First, Boston MPO staff will present some updates about recent and upcoming MPO activities that relate to transit, including upcoming investment decisions, technical assistance, and other activities happening later on this spring. We'll then take a few minutes to give transit operators and transit supporting agencies an opportunity to make any announcements they'd like to make to the larger group. Then we'll be moving on to our main presentation of today, which is hearing about MBTA Regional Rail, both the upcoming schedules and longer term plans for rail transformation. And we're very grateful to the MBTA and Keolis folks who have joined us today for that. Then we'll hear, as Tegan mentioned, about the MPO's new park and ride and bicycle parking dashboard that shows data near MBTA stations. There'll be some time for public comment and then some closing material and information about next steps. You can find a copy of this agenda and some supporting materials for the meeting on the March 19th page of the MPO meeting calendar. And with respect to the summary of the last meeting that's posted there, if you want to provide any comments or suggestions for that, you're welcome to do that. We'll be taking them through March 26th. So just to give a sense of some guidelines for this meeting, my colleagues Sandy Johnston, Kate White, Roisin Foley, and Matt Archer will be co-hosting with me. You may have noticed that you joined the meeting on mute. The hosts will mute and unmute participants and then mute them again after you finish speaking. Please do not mute yourself. If you do, it'll take the host a little bit of time to request you to unmute yourself. If you haven't already, please rename yourself with your first and last name and then a comma and your affiliation. The chat box is open, as you know from entering your information, so we encourage you to use that throughout the meeting to submit questions and comments. If you'd like to speak during the discussion, please use the raise hand function. And you can find that in a couple of different places depending on your version of Zoom and whether you're using it on your desktop or on a mobile device. You can look either at the participants button at the bottom of the screen. You can also find it with the reactions button, so there may be a couple of places where that appears. If you run into any technical difficulties during the meeting, you can send a message through the chat and an MPO staff member will reach out to you. You can also reach Roisin at rfoley@ctps.org or at 857-702-3704. And you'll see many of these instructions repeated on the slides. In general, we'll be prioritizing questions and comments that come from transit providers and municipalities during most portions of the meeting, although we will try to get to everybody as time allows in the various sections. And as I mentioned, there'll be some open time for public comment towards the end. You'll see links that'll appear throughout some of the presentations. They will also appear in the chat as we can do that. Don't worry about rushing to write them down. If you want to remember them, we'll be sending out a post-meeting email that'll have all that information in it. And as I mentioned, this meeting is being recorded and you will be able to review the recording later on our MPO YouTube page as well as our website. And you can find recordings of our past meetings at those locations as well. So with that, we can kind of get started with our MPO updates. I'll speak first a little bit about some upcoming decisions happening around the MPO's short-term capital plan, our transportation improvement program. As those who are familiar with the MPO, a lot of our major investment decisions, both for capital projects and programs and for research and planning work, tend to happen in the spring. For the Transportation Improvement Program, the MPO members are determining what transportation projects they will fund over the next 5 years. And there's a lot of connectivity to transit in the work done through the Transportation Improvement Program. We support transit-related projects with MPO dollars that we get from the federal government. These get channeled through our Community Connections Program, which is our first and last mile program. As well as our Transit Modernization Program, which is supporting transit amenities, station upgrades, and things of that nature. We also support transit through our roadway projects as well. You know, we've done some recent work to emphasize dedicated bus lanes and bus priority and making investments that improve transit mobility. As Tate mentioned, one of our responsibilities as the MPO also, the board approves the capital programming for the MBTA as well as for the RTAs in the region, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority and the Cape Ann Transportation Authority. And another connecting piece for our transportation improvement program relates to performance management. And we include information about our performance targets and the relationship between the projects we fund and performance improvements in our TIP document. So you can learn more about those materials there. Next slide, please, Matt. So just to give you a sense of some upcoming things that are happening if you want to be involved, we have a couple of key meetings that are happening over the next month or two. On March 25th, the MPO will agree on a draft funding plan for its MPO dollars, and we'll also be reviewing the MBTA, CADA, and MWRTA's capital investment processes and their proposed investments. On April 8th, we'll be discussing some transit safety performance targets that will be incorporated into the TIP. On April 29th, the MPO will release a draft TIP for public review, so there'll be a public comment period following that. And then on May 27th, we're expecting to review all comments with the board and endorse the final TIP. So these meetings are great ways to learn about what's going on, to provide comment if you're supportive of particular projects. We definitely encourage folks to participate. If you want to learn more about the TIP, you can visit bostonmpo.org/TIP. And as I mentioned, recordings are available on the Boston MPO's YouTube page. And now I'll turn it over to Sandy to give some updates about our Unified Planning Work Program.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, so if the TIP that Michelle just described is the capital construction side of what the MPO does, the Unified Planning Work Program is the document that lays out how the MPO will spend the technical assistance and study funding and planning funding that it receives from the federal government. And right now, we're in a phase of developing that document, which I manage, and I'm the primary contact for, where we are working staff and the UPWP committee of the MPO board are working together to decide what studies are going to be funded in federal fiscal year 2022, starting in October. There are two key meetings coming up on March 25th and April 8th. That is next week and probably 2 weeks after that. And the studies being selected are in a document called the Universe of Proposed Studies, which is available in the link that is on the slide, and it's going to be in the chat. is also available at CTPS, at bostonmpo.org/UPWP, and I believe that link is going to be in the chat as well. And just on the timing here, the development process will continue through probably May or June, and the final document will be endorsed by the MPO in July or August. And more information is available on the website, including a very detailed flyer and a development page that lays out the timeline that I just discussed. All right, next slide, please, Matt. Also going to talk for a second about a pretty cool event that we MPO staff hosted recently. In the current UPWP, we funded a task called Regional Travel Demand Management Strategies Coordination, which is a relatively small budget line in which staff hosted our forums on travel demand management in collaboration with our partner agency, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And the first of these was about a month ago, just about a month ago. In February, we had 3 terrific speakers and a really great conversation. It really went on for almost 2 hours on the topic of travel demand management in a post-COVID world, kind of envisioning how the field of travel demand management will need to change and what topics and regional coordination might be necessary ongoing. That recording is on YouTube as well, and the link is in the chat. We are looking forward to hosting another such forum later in the year, and you should sign up for our various forms of digital contact to keep an eye out for that. Also looking for ideas. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or any of us.
Okay, thank you, Sandy, for those 2 items. We're going to move things over to Paul Christner, who's the manager of the MPO's Transit Analysis and Planning Group, to talk a little bit about regional transit service planning technical assistance.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to tell everyone, remind everyone about our Regional Transit Service Planning Technical Support Program. We have a pot of money that is available for technical support issues related to route planning, ridership, cost effectiveness, and other services like that. Eligible applicants include RTAs, TMAs, municipalities, and the MAP subregions, essentially folks in the region that are interested in operating service. The one caveat is that it does need to be transit service that is open to the public. The link at the bottom of the page will give you more details and show you how to sign up. You can and it'll also have my contact information if you have questions about the program. We do have funding left, so we'd be happy to talk to anyone who might be interested in thinking about service or adjustments as we come out of the COVID pandemic. And I'll also talk about a couple of the transit-related MPO activities that we're working on right now, 2 projects that are funded in federal fiscal year 2021 in the UPWP. The first one is Future of the Curb Phase 2. We're creating a curb management guidebook, and we've been talking to municipal officials, and obviously transit is a big part of that, so we may be reaching out as well to some of the folks here to talk about things like bus lanes and bus stops and other things that are related to curb usage. The second project is Access to Central Business Districts Phase 2. We're focused on COVID recovery here and thinking about how central business districts will recover from COVID, and obviously transit will play a big role in that. And we're launching that and thinking about research and maybe reaching out to some of you for that as well. The link on the page also will show you some of our recent similar studies. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. And to close out this section, after which we'll take some questions, I want to talk a little bit about something we'll be exploring over the next couple months that's a companion of sorts to this transit working group. As part of this pilot, we're exploring different ways that'll be effective to get transit providers and others kind of connected with one another. And a number of the meetings that we've had prior to this one have followed the format we're going to be following today, which is generally presentations with some question and answer sessions. And we'd like to complement this by trying out some small group discussions that would be kind of in a more casual format where people could talk more directly to each other and share some ideas about particular topics. So the general format of these would be, approximately an hour over Zoom. It would be a pretty conversational setting. MPO staff would provide a couple of facilitation questions, maybe some readily available resources if they help the discussion, but generally kind of a pretty lightweight, relaxed event. We will be planning to limit the number of participants at each session just to try out keeping things small so that the conversations are manageable. We're probably going to cap them around 15 participants that aren't staff per session. We will likely need to give some priority to transit providers and municipalities and transit supporting agencies, but we'll try to accommodate as many folks within those sessions as we can. We're looking to host these over approximately April 5th to sometime May 23rd, of course, accounting for school vacation week and the Passover and Easter and other holidays happening during that time. We're also looking to kind of mix up timing of the various sessions, depending on any feedback we get about availability. Some may be earlier in the day, while others may come a little bit later on or happen in the late afternoon. And so what we would do after trying out these series of conversations is that at our next transit working group meeting, which would probably happen sometime in June, we would do a report back to the group about how they went, what they learned, and what they might be able to add to our ongoing series of larger meetings. Next slide, please, Matt. So to give you a sense of some of the things that we might talk about at these sessions, there are a couple of things that staff would really like to host sessions about, particularly medical and human services transportation, as well as microtransit and demand response services, noting that a lot of these things, services are starting to appear in various parts of the Boston region. Other possible topics could include, regionalizing service and potentially consolidating them where it's possible to do so, forming partnerships between transit providers and others to support ongoing post-pandemic transit recovery, maybe having a few discussions that focus on specific sub-areas of the Boston region to discuss needs and gaps and possible solutions in those areas, looking at changes in customers and customer needs as we move kind of through the pandemic and into kind of the post-pandemic environment, and also about some topics related to transit and land use. And I encourage you to definitely suggest topics that you think you might be interested in the chat box. We will likely send out some additional survey materials to collect people's feedback as we set these up over the coming weeks. And we look forward to testing this out with you, and thank all of you both for your ongoing participation in this group and your support as we experiment a little bit in trying things out in the pilot and seeing what works. So finally, we've said a lot on a number of different MPO topics, so I'd like to give folks an opportunity to ask us any questions. Okay. Give folks another minute here. Okay. Okay.
We have a couple of hands raised, Michelle.
Sure. Josh Ostroff from T4 Massachusetts.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really pleased to see this initiative because I think that scale of interaction will be really valuable. I would just suggest housing and zoning is a good topic, something we probably aren't solving as quickly as we need to. And that I think that could, I think many people who would be participating particularly from agencies and municipalities would be, have a lot to learn and contribute on that. But I don't know that this is the best way to provide that input, so I don't mean to.
No, this is great. Any feedback at this point is great, so thank you. Okay, Franny Osman.
Hi, thank you. I agree. It's nice to see these discussions being started. It seems very similar in some ways to what the state was doing with the Scoot Commission and the having the regional coordinating councils around. because we dealt with whatever the issues were in that area, in our loose areas. Except it sounds like the discussions will be more topic oriented rather than exactly location oriented. I'm just curious if there was an awareness as you were creating these, trying to sort of replicate some of the things that we had when RCC's, regional coordinating councils, were more active. Because I thought that was a really good program and setup. And so glad to see us connecting on these local transit issues.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a number of MPO staff who regularly participate in RCC meetings around the region. And we've seen that they've been, great forums for convening people about things happening in particular geographic areas. And we're trying to find the best way that we can complement that work without kind of putting too many more meetings on folks that may want to participate, but finding our own niche to address. So, we're happy to get any feedback that'll help us strike an effective balance. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in through the chat. Sandy or Kate, if you could queue us up with some of those, that would be great.
Sure. So we had a question specifically about the small transit working groups or discussion groups from Jennifer Glass, who asked about organizing them around specific commuter rail lines or towns without a stop that are near commuter rail stops, kind of a working group for a specific line. I think that's definitely something we could consider.
No, definitely, I agree, and we can take that into the group of feedback as we set these up.
I'm just going to go in order here. We have a question from Wig Zamor. Have you done any analysis of future travel demand from lower Mystic opportunity zones?
I'm not personally familiar with that work. I know that we were CTPS has been involved with that larger lower Mystic study. I don't know if my colleagues have anything to chime in about that.
I see Brad has his hands up, if we could unmute him. There we go.
Thanks for the question. I'd welcome staff's perspective here as well. And it's not specific to your question about opportunity zones. However, ZTPS staff was the technical lead on the 3-year casino mandated lower Mystic regional working group, which was a sea change in the way that inner core municipalities coordinate transportation and land use decisions. The city of Boston, the city of Everett, the city of Somerville were the nucleus. CTPS and MAPC provided the horsepower for analytics, and we had great participation from other state agencies as well. That's all an advancement of the adopted MAPC land use plan for the for the lower Mystic portion of the inner core. And I think it's a model that we ought to all remind ourselves of. There's a great technical report online that you can find, and we should look for opportunities to replicate it all around the region.
Thanks, Brad. And yeah, happy to continue to facilitate answering questions about that offline as well. And then we had a couple of questions about regional rail, which I think we will put off to allow MBTA staff to answer them after their presentation.
All right. Okay, we have a question from Clark Frazier.
Okay. I'm having trouble hearing the meeting and understanding the agenda, but I'm here because I think you need something like the Boston Transportation Planning Review, which happened like 30 years ago, and look at everything because there's so much, the MBTA is planning for the past, and that we have not any new projects in the pipeline or any even ideas of things that we should be doing, and projects that we thought should be done 30 years ago have been quietly dropped. And I'm also concerned, we'll bring this up again and again, is that there's single track on the old colony. But I'm just concerned that looking at small projects doesn't really help us. I'm from the town of Hingham, and we have separate transit services that could be run by separate companies. So you can't, if you go to work on the train, you can't come back by boat and that kind of thing. So I don't know what this is supposed to do, or whether this is just more bureaucratic busy work. So sorry to be so negative, but I'm not understanding what this would accomplish unless we looked at things like extending the Hull bus to Weymouth or something like that. I'm not sure what this is doing.
Well, this particular group is kind of focused on just connecting people to shared solutions as one aspect of the larger work of the MPO, which is part of that broader scale investment that we make in transportation projects and research. There's definitely more. We can talk about some of the questions that you raised offline, but this is kind of a smaller piece of the larger work that we do. And if any of my colleagues want to add anything at this point, please do.
Yeah, Michelle, maybe I'll go back, step back in just because I did some context setting at the beginning, and I don't know if you were able to hear that at the beginning, Clark, but this is really an ongoing meeting, as Michelle said, to convene transit providers and stakeholders in transit to talk about relevant issues. And so it's being convened by the Boston region because there are quite a few stakeholders in the region that, as I mentioned, really need to coordinate with each other. And we are committed to trying to facilitate that as much as possible. So I know there are a lot of kind of specific questions going into the chat about, commuter rail specifics and services. This is really a topic for kind of learning and coordinating and talking with each other. Those of us who work in transportation, use transportation with sort of a focus on transportation providers and their needs, because there are quite a range of them, a wide range of them in the region. And so if that doesn't serve your needs, please feel free to sort of reach out to us. We're happy to have conversations with you about the topics that you do want to talk about more directly, Clark or others, separately. So you feel free to reach out to staff after this meeting as well to follow up on any of those topics that you'd like to explore in a different way. You're muted,
Yes,
Michelle.
Brian Kane with his hand raised, and after that we can kind of move on to later topics in the agenda, can come back to things towards the ends of the meeting.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And again, just wanted to, my name is Brian Kane. I'm a board member of the Boston MPO, and just wanted to express my appreciation for all of the CTPS staff for doing this today. It's difficult to keep 99 people on a meeting organized, but I think you're doing a great job. This is the beginning of the meeting, and we will be getting into specifics around commuter rail and regional rail and Keolis later in the meeting. So I think everyone's concerns will be heard and considered at some point, and I would ask for everyone's patience. Thank you.
All right, so I just want to give transit providers and transit supporting agencies in the audience a quick opportunity to make any announcements they'd like to make to the group before we move on to the MBTA and Keolis presentations. This can be things about new programs or something you want to announce about your service. Okay, I'm just scanning for some raised hands. I'm seeing some more questions and comments in the chat about regional rails. So maybe at this point, we can move on to that part of the agenda. And so I want to thank the representatives from the MBTA and Keolis that are here today to speak with us. We have Rob Diadamo, who is the Executive Director of Commuter Rail for the MBTA, Alistair Sawers, who is the Director of Rail Transformation for the MBTA, as well as Dave Walker, who is the Director of Revenue and Marketing for Keolis Commuter Services. So I'd like to welcome them and thank them for being here. Alistair, should I queue up your presentation first?
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, we can advance your slides for you, or if you'd like to share your screen, that works too.
I'll let you do that.
Okay.
Just to make sure it works.
All right, and I think we're all set. Thank you.
Welcome everybody, and thank you again, Michelle, for the opportunity. definitely wanted to meet you all and meet a forum like this to be able to talk firstly about rail transformation and make it clear what it is and what it isn't. And also to, in conjunction with Keolis, talk a bit about the logic behind the spring commuter rail schedule. And I'm doing it now, but yeah, we're slowly moving to using the phrase regional rail, though there may or may not be a different branding of that in the future. So first thing I wanted to run through was a bit of an introduction. Some of you might have picked up my presentation to the FMCB back in January. So some of this covers the same ground, and some of you were also involved in Rail Vision and some of the outreach around that. So I don't want to overlap too much, but I do want to make sure everyone has the same basis and understanding of the goals, how things have slightly modified as pandemic has hit, and how we may reframe some of that going through the future. And also, you know, we have to acknowledge it, the constraints on our budgets and how we can do more with less. So there is a bit of that too, I'm afraid. So I'm going to be talking about transformation, going to be talking about the first steps we're making now, and also talking about how we can perhaps work together in the future too. So first, next slide, please. So the first point I did want to make is there's a lot of talk about electrification, but actually transformation is about delivering service to the end user. And we're trying, it's an easy habit for people like me on the planning and construction and mega project kind of world to just focus on capital works. But this is all about providing an end service, and every change and new approach we implement is intended to deliver a service improvement and something for users or other benefits. And on the note of other benefits, can we talk about the next slide, please? So the Rail Vision study exercise did quite a systematic outreach and trying to prioritize and look at the various goals. These we have all pretty much retained. They are now nuanced in terms of how growth may be reflected, how the needs of the region have changed through COVID, and that's to some degree are still unknown. Some of the differences in needs for passenger experience in terms of social distancing and cleaning, and then just action, you know, I think these goals have been proven well thought out because the issues of equity are getting much more crucial. Climate change, while there's been some impacts from reduction in travel, those are minimal, and as I think we're all seeing, impact on climate is still significant. And if anything, the requirements to get to net zero at 2050 are, if anything, tougher now. So, next slide, please. So the concepts I want to talk about quickly, what is regional rail? So for us, we're defining it as a clock face scheduling, for first point to make that clear, which obviously has an impact on all of the transit providers around the region, but also all the users. So it makes it much easier to pick a train, much easier to set up a connection between whatever the first mile and last mile would be. But in this particular case, very keen on making sure that bus services are integrated. And we'll facilitate that in whatever way possible. We do acknowledge that frequencies at the moment may not be getting there, but the hope is that 20 to 30 minute frequencies, those become more practical to set up bus connections. So the idea within that regional rail service is to split between an express service, acknowledging that there still will be commuters of some description, and there will also be a need to provide a service that's competitive for the ends of the lines to provide journey times that are quicker. Those can either be non-stop or skip-stop, focused on peak to the extent there is a peak, but it may not be that concept. It may just be hourly or something. And then a local service, which again, for the outer reaches of our network, would make more sense to be local going express, and however you want to call that. We call it zonal express, but that's just, it's not a widely used phrase. So the idea is to provide that to still give a competitive journey time compared to an all local service, though it does put more constraints on the network itself in terms of the number of slots you've got going through. And then inside Route 128 would be to look at urban rail. So that would be a concept of high frequency, much more like, subway, I guess you'd call it, or just transit. But to the extent this is transit. So the intent is just to be agnostic of the actual mode and provide a service that looks like any other subway or rapid transit. Next slide, please. So the basis of all, and the reason I'm here and the reason I joined the MBTA is the resolution that the board passed setting up the Rail Transformation Office. And that had directives which have all remained in place, and we're all progressing these. First of which is to focus on a phase 1, to focus on the Providence line as a regional rail trial, Fairmount as an urban rail, and Boston to, in this case, Lynn, but for network reasons, actually we're looking at Beverly as the turnaround point for an urban rail service. The intent is to electrify those, though the precise technology and how much is overhead catenary versus battery or even hydrogen if that becomes available. That has not been sorted out yet. Clearly the Providence line already is electrified, so there's relatively small changes required there. So we're doing a study right now to look at that, and I'll be a bit more on that in a minute. And then also within all that, to look at integrating properly with bus and subway, providing improved parking and first and last mile collections, and very critical point, which often gets missed, is improving stations. So here we're talking particularly about high-level accessible platforms, but that isn't the only thing that needs improving, and we acknowledge that, and I see there were some comments on the chat on that. There are, of course, operational side of things, and then there's also just the quality side of things, and we understand both are important, and there's sadly a fundamental state of good repair issue also at quite a lot of stations in terms of access. So all that needs to be put in place to deliver each of these lines in a transformed way. And in order to do that, we're going to start with a business case for the whole phase 1. But while we're doing that, we're not waiting. We're also looking at this feasibility of an EMU pilot on the Northeast Corridor. Next slide, please. This is just kind of a longer list just to show the extent of the effort and the need to look at in a holistic way at all the areas, both on the operation side and the infrastructure side. Some of these are related to state of good repair, but other opportunities such as looking at how to enhance stations, give us a chance to involve the private sector, to facilitate transit-oriented development, and maybe through mitigations get improvements. Also, there's the potential to work with all the local authorities on making improvements to actual access, and things that come to mind are bus drop-off, also pedestrian access and bike access and microtransit. So all the usual things that we all like to talk about, but it'd be nice to actually implement. And we're trying to find ways to efficiently do that, focusing in on the transformed lines to provide a suite of improvements. But to reassure everybody, we're not just going to look at phase 1, we are trying to look at the whole network. So we have programs of improvements and find ways of doing this that are more efficient, so we can do bulk purchase and get our costs down too. On the operations side, we'll get a bit more about this in a minute, we're also trying to look at quick wins. So first of all, it's trying to provide these service planning improvements using existing diesel technology. So that does give us some constraints with the technology, but there's a lot that can be done with the existing network, with providing either small amounts of double tracking, turn tracks, just maybe grade crossing improvements. So that there's quite a small list of relatively small, what we're calling no regrets investments that can be targeted at the pinch points we have on the network. Some of them are known, and actually, how should I put it? Some of them aren't necessarily unknown, but they are the magnitude of the impact of some of the problems on the network are not truly appreciated. One of which it seems to be a lot of need to have non-revenue moves around the network to reposition our fleet a lot. So actually the new schedule that you've just seen actually goes a fair way to solve some of that, so that you get less of this single trip downtown on peak and then leave all the equipment downtown all day and then come back for the evening peak, which is very inefficient compared to the all day use, where we're finding we and our friends at Keolis do not need to use as much equipment to deliver equivalent service levels. So other ideas of where we could also work, we can work together on ideas of making transfers frictionless. Some of that is going to be better with AFC, but we're trying to look at ways of doing that now with existing technology. That's both an issue around parking, but it's also could be an issue around local transit and BTA transit. We acknowledge that some of the customer information, we've actually, through Keolis, invested quite a bit on improving that, but there's always scope for more. And a lot of what sometimes gets missed with these major programs is monitoring of the impact. And we're trying to put in place various ways of monitoring the impact of our improvements. Next slide, please. So just to give everyone a feel for the time horizon here, none of the major infrastructure pieces are going to be quick, but we do have some looming deadlines, and those of you that saw the board presentation will have heard all about this already. But we have an aging fleet which will require replacing in around 2030, and the way procurement runs and manufacture, we're actually going to have to make decisions in the very near term about that. That's also tied in with the reprocurement of the operator too. So this is just for illustration, because at the moment it's not funded, but this is how things could pan out and how we would like to approach the future. Next slide, please. And next. So we talked a little bit about this a minute ago. The hope is to develop a program right now for coming back better. I think we're flexible as to when precisely it will be implemented, but the target is in the fall. There is intended to be a new timetable at that point, schedule. And a lot of the planning work we're hoping can go in across the summer will be looking at taking this schedule that we've just put in place as a first step and looking where we can add back service or maybe modify service to provide even more clock face and frequencies that respond to actual demand that we start seeing across the summer, and also work with partners such as yourselves about making sure that bus integration works, that both in terms of what the route is and in terms of the timing of that, working on marketing ideas in terms of fare products, and then just ensuring we have outreach and we have that monitoring to work out which corridors where the increased service levels are required. Some of that is, we appreciate chicken and egg, and we've tried to look at other measures such as congestion to give us an indication of where we should be putting in service as well. So this is part of a broader discussion. Part of my side of the effort is, because I'm looking at much of the future planning you see on the right hand side of this page, I will also be looking at the areas for investment and looking at what's coming out of this planning to see where our constraints are. As I said before, a lot of it's known, but sometimes when we start trying to do things, we find that issues that we thought were an issue can be got around, whereas other issues pop up. And I think there's one easy one, which I think we've been talking about, some of the single tracking. Those don't always cause a problem, but there are other pieces that are just insurmountable. And then the clear one is the area around Ballard Vale on the Haverhill line. So we're understanding that. We're looking at ways to address that project as fast as possible and get funding. A separate sort of proof of concept is then the EMU pilot we're looking at putting in place on the Providence line. It's not quite as easy as we'd like, because there are the power requirements were never fully built out by Amtrak because they're running a limited service. So we do have to invest some money in the infrastructure. But again, till we've tested our energy modeling, which we're doing right now in conjunction with consultants, we don't know how much additional service we can run before that becomes an issue. So we're working at ways of starting to electrify and maybe trialing a lower level of service or phasing in that service, so that there may well be ways around that without having to wait for new power feeds. So that's just an example that we can give right now. So in addition to the pilot planning, we're also got longer term views. So we're looking at what the service plans would look like around the network for a future technology. And we're being, I think, relaxed about the time horizon. We understand that we can't definitively work out which way we're going to go on each line at this point, but I think we're trying to be flexible and appreciate the technological change is actually our friend at this point. It's definitely looking like the battery technology that we've not quite seen as mature yet on some rail projects will probably be available in the time horizon we're looking at, certainly for our second phase of rail transformation. So we're trying to plan on that basis and see how feasible it will be to mix what they call discontinuous electrification, mix between providing overhead line equipment and battery. So for example, some of the constraints that were sort of shown to turn this into a multi-billion-dollar project very quickly may be avoidable by choice of different technology in the relatively near term. So we're working with the consultants of that to do everything line by line and examine that in detail and look at the cost benefit of the full conversion. So that's the technology and electrification study. And then fleet and facilities is something that was not actually covered by Rail Vision in much detail. And what we're finding is it is quite a major issue where we have to put our trains on layover. So with regional rail, the problem with our problem with layover doesn't go away. It actually just changes. It changes to being an overnight problem. So we still have to invest in that because we need somewhere to store the fleet and maintain it. Next slide, please. So a bit more detail on the Providence Line pilot. There currently is a very small piece of the line that is not electrified. That is a section of track that we use in one of the stations. So that's currently being electrified by Amtrak acting as an agent for us. So that should be done by next year. So that will not be a constraint. As I described before, the feeder modeling is being done right now, and we are reaching out to some other authorities that are currently procuring EMUs and looking if they can provide further options in their procurements, so we can buy into an existing order to accelerate our test. So that's one approach to get a vehicle much earlier than you would otherwise, having to fully procure and design something specific. And then we're also looking at interim options of working with either Amtrak, using some of their facilities to store this new equipment, or electrify one of our existing layovers on the Northeast Corridor. So next slide, please. And the next one, thank you. So this is kind of wanted to leave maximum amount of time for questions, so I should stop talking fairly soon, but I definitely wanted to appeal to all of you. We are looking for your help and an efficient venue to do that. That may be a quarterly advisory kind of meeting to get everybody's input on what specifically of concerns, where there might be efficient ways to partner. Certainly in the first level is just getting the word out to customers so customers understand why there's a difference and why we've changed, and attract new customers. So we're segmenting between commuter customers who we're trying to attract back, new potentially reverse commute customers, and also all-day customers as well. And those all require different approaches and have different means and modes to access stations, and that then speaks to the kind of fare products we'd want, the kind of outreach we need to use, and perhaps ways of delivering fare products as well will be slightly different. So we're interested in all of that. And then, yeah, I think at a more minor level, because I'm working on the possible improvements, is to look at station facility improvements that we could make that are relatively small, or maybe where we could partner with local authorities to deliver those improvements. May not be immediately on the station property, maybe on local roads, so that we can have better drop-off, because that does seem to be an issue on quite a lot of the outer regional stations. And then the final point is, which is not easy to do, but it's also easy to talk about, which is to get more proactive about soliciting transit-oriented development on our side. We do have some land, we have the ability to influence other bits of land or do land swaps. So that's definitely something we're also interested in doing, and targeting that on the lines and stations where we see a need. And that's it from my side. There are some additional slides in this pack I expect to be shared that kind of give some more illustrations. Actually, I might want to go a couple of slides forward now to the schedule. Well, firstly, here's a quick diagram of showing where the urban rail region is and where we're considering putting in turn tracks and turning around the service, just for illustration. Next slide, please. Oops, yeah, that's a quick summary, and I don't want to steal Dave's thunder on this, but that's a quick summary of the current schedules, and then some of the rail vision objectives that have been developed by the various alternatives. And then next slide, please. Did want to show, there we are, there is clock face. I know it's not everywhere, but this is just an example of Beverley inbound 30-minute headways with 20 and 50 past the hour being the focus for the majority of the day, and we can talk more about what the constraints are once we get into Q&A. So that's it from me, and over to Dave.
Oh, Michelle, we can't hear you.
Oh, that's okay. I was just helping with the transition. Looks like we're all set. Thanks.
So there were just 2 slides. There were a couple of points we wanted to expand on that Alistair's touched on. So the April schedule, of course, is now publicly available on the MBTA website. So it's been up since Monday. So if everyone hasn't seen it, you're able to download PDF copies of it there. The particular logic for April was to kind of achieve 2 things. So one is to sort of have an eye on the future rail vision and trying to move as many lines as possible in that direction. As Alistair said, there's a sort of clearly a long-term plan involved in this, and the idea is in April to see if we can make some changes if possible. And the other was to try and, as efficiently as possible, rebalance the service to cover, partly reduce the cost of operating the service, of course, and also partly to rebalance the service throughout the day, so as to cater for the changes in travel patterns that we're already starting to see, with people working sort of more flexibly, a lot of home working, a lot of people potentially making journeys outside the peaks and so on. And so this, the chart on the right hand side is its number of trains, but it's not particularly important, the specifics, as this can be looked at from the point of view of train miles, revenue hours, and so on. The key thing is to see, what you can see is the sort of, in relative terms, these are fairly small reductions, but the slight reduction in the number of trains in the start of the day and end of the day, and the corresponding increase in the middle of the day. So you can see, for example, the Haverhill line that's in the top block receives a significant increase in the number of off-peak trains or trains in the middle of the day. And the whole logic that you'll see spread across most lines in the schedule is to try and kind of balance out the service throughout the day. The other thing to particularly call out is, of course, at the end of last year, there was a lot of debate around late evening services. And in the final April schedule, the last trains on all lines generally leave Boston around 11 p.m. There's a bit of variation, but it's from around 10:45 to around 11 p.m. So sort of we and the MBTA were able to come up with a way to maintain evening service much later than had originally been discussed, which is clearly a big positive overall. Could we flick on to the next slide, please? And the other thing we particularly wanted to highlight is for those of you who sort of follow commuter rail on social media, you'll have seen sort of various Twitter posts and so on have come up or tweets have come up in the last few hours about the schedule. The plan is over the next few weeks and indeed into the summer, we're going to gradually, as the kind of overall public health situation improves, gradually start promoting commuter rail a bit more. And a key part of that is working with as many stakeholders as possible to both promote the new service and highlight the benefits to people. So we've included at the bottom here, when the pack is sent round, there's an email address. Anyone, particularly towns, RTAs, other representatives, we have a whole range of marketing content and social media material that we produce. And we would love anybody who wants to reach out to us to get that information and get those kind of packs of information that you can use. We very much appreciate anybody sort of who wants to work with us in promoting commuter rail. They can reach out to that email address and we're happy to work with you. The key themes we want to emphasize, of course, are both the overall journey opportunities going forwards, but also some of the really good work that's gone on over the last year. So there's currently on the commuter rail mobile ticketing system, there's a 5-day flex pass where you can buy 5 tickets and use them at any point in a 90-day period. So there's already some good opportunities for people who have or are going to have irregular travel patterns in future that we would really like to promote if possible. So as I said, if anyone wants to reach out to us and discuss more how they can sort of work with us to promote commuter rail, we'd be very happy to hear from them. That was everything I had.
Okay, well, thank you both for those great presentations. At this point, we can move into question and answer. Kate and Sandy, could you get me started from the chat, please, while we wait for some hands to come in?
Yeah, of course. And everyone, thank you so much. If you can input your questions into the chat, we're going to do our best to try and answer all of them. And we've had some come in. So Alistair and Dave, I'd love to start us off with one, and then maybe we can hop over to some of the hand raises. We're also going to be trying to prioritize our transit providers as part of our transit pilot working group, but we'll also try and get to everyone's questions today. And if we don't, we're going to make sure that all these get sent over and then hopefully get you some information. So to start us off, could you talk, the 2040 plan included increased transit investments in gateway cities, such as Waltham. What is the anticipated timeline for greater frequencies on the Waltham, and this is the Fitchburg line?
Yeah, so it's Alistair. I'll take that first, and then we can switch. I think you need to unmute Rob as well. So the timelines are unknown at this point. We're studying the infrastructure constraints. As you will know, there are some fairly significant ones on the Fitchburg line. The intent is to actually focus on the nearer section of it for the urban rail concept in the near term, and that would be sort of immediately after phase 1. So that is in the 2030 to 35 time range. And that's likely where it's going to be, but you know, at the moment we're just studying it. It's dependent on funding. It is certainly, like everything, you know, one of the series of priorities. But we're going to try and do the most we can with the existing infrastructure to improve frequencies, and whether that can be achieved using you know, bi-mode vehicles or something different. That may get us there. We just haven't studied it enough to know that yet.
And to Alistair's point earlier, I mean, remember, this is going to be a very iterative process, right? This is not one day, you don't open South, you know, the way we're going to open South Coast Rail one day, it'll be a new thing. As you can see with the new schedules, we're experimenting with different ways to run the service. And, you know, for example, if we get potentially an EMU pilot running on the Providence line, that could free up equipment that we might be running on other lines. And so this process is going to be, we're not saying to people you have to wait until some distant future to see improvements. Our goal is to keep improving the line over, you know, incrementally over time, and so hopefully people will see those benefits, you know, as we change our schedules, you know, often twice a year, unlike the last year where I think we changed it 6 times, but that was obviously that's not an experience I think any of us need to do again for a while.
Well, thank you so much. I think I'll hop over to the hand raises. Brian Kane, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So Rob or Alistair or Dave, first of all, thank you for your time and for the presentation. Really appreciate it. I'm curious if there are existing EMUs in operation in the US that meet the FRA's crashworthiness standards that you know of, and sort of what you think the prototype might be for the vehicle the team might end up procuring. Thanks.
I'll start first and I'll let the others add in, but I think there's two pieces to that question. One is the FRA standards have actually changed. It still isn't quite as nice as or easy as we'd want, but they are now about, I don't want to go too much into detail, but it's more, there are different approaches which include crash impact absorption as well as the impact resistance, which means lighter, more European style vehicles have been proposed and are currently I don't know if type approved is the right word, but anyway, they are in procurement, they are being tested. Caltrain example, the Stadler KISS variant that is now approved to the US use is one of the options we could look at. There is also a Bombardier multi-level 3 that is also being procured by New Jersey Transit as an EMU effectively, but it's a modified version of an existing rail car. But it ends up with the same product. And frankly, there was a Bud rail car a very long time ago. So there was a DMU. So there are, there have been options in history, and the idea would be to try and use an existing vehicle at the moment. Those are the two. The third one is slightly different. It's single level, which might not fit all our uses we're looking at, but we're not necessarily married to bi-level. And that is being used by Scepter at the moment. So there are opportunities. And then, of course, the future one would be looking at some new versions of, well, there's another Stadler and there's a couple of Alstom trains as well that would apply and could be easily converted to fit within the FRA regulations. But then you'd be stuck on that much longer timeline you saw in the time horizon I put up. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was great. I mean, I think obviously we're hoping that lots of the car builders want to be in the market, because obviously that will generate competition and price and everything else. And so I think I'm not 100% sure. I thought Amtrak also, as part of one of their procurements, maybe had EMUs as an option. And so, like I said, the more of these players who are in the market, I think the more will benefit and not be sort of held captive to one or two providers. So I think we're hoping that lots of people want to be part of this.
Yeah, and if I'll just leap in with a little bit of follow-up, having seen one of the questions in the chat. So the distinction between, there are some bi-mode locomotives and electric locomotives that are completely available right now, which could haul our existing coach fleet. So that is an option, but there the performance difference is significant. They are potentially slightly, or depending on the model, better than diesel haul, but generally they do not achieve the acceleration profiles that we need for some of our short gaps between stations to provide the journey time improvements that we're looking for to, to provide that overall end-to-end competitive service with the car. So, Morton.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, the other issue that sort of has stymied this process going, in the past has been lack of a Southside maintenance facility or lack of a Southside electric maintenance facility or even storage. How do you get over that hurdle given land prices in the region and the distances you need?
I think it's one of the things, Brian, that fleet and facilities plan will help us identify. But I mean, clearly something on the south side would be better. Most of our services on the south side, but our biggest facilities on the north side, and we're using the Grand Junction for lots of moves. And so I think you identify a really good challenge. I think another challenge that maybe sometimes people don't fully appreciate is just to get the workforce, to maintain a whole new fleet. I mean, even in the existing fleet of diesel locomotives and coaches, the newer locomotives are much different and require different trainings, and the the teams who work on these things, it's incredible how hard they work to kind of keep up to date with what the next qualification is and what the next level of certification is to work on them. But this will be a whole nother thing, right? And then a whole nother set of spare parts and everything else that goes with it. So we want to do this in a smart way. I mean, obviously there's something really exciting. I think if we had an EMU, all of us would be like, yes, we have an EMU and we really want to run it. But we also do want to make sure that we kind of understand that, as you were saying, Brian, the maintenance implications, where are they going to get done, who's going to work on them, how do we make sure that the team gets the training it needs to be able to keep them in service. It sounds kind of boring, but unfortunately, a lot of the improvements we have to make are going to be kind of boring improvements that will result in, I think, exciting operational improvements.
I like boring, Rob, so keep going. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm going to ask we had a couple questions in the chat regarding federal funding. So one was, what are the plans for the federal stimulus funding? And another was, what are the opportunities for advancing the rail vision electrification and platform reconstruction commitments on the Beverly, Newburyport, Fairmont, and Providence line? And could the MBTA take any advantage with federal funding coming in?
So federal funding, I'm not going to pretend to understand every element of how the money moves around, but do understand that, 6 or 8 months ago, we were talking about using substantial portions of our capital plan to basically keep our operating budget moving. We were potentially canceling projects or scaling back projects. And so the new funding, it's phenomenal what the administration, the Congress has been able to do, what the governor's office, all the different partners have been able to help us kind of solidify a little bit right now. And also remember that unlike a lot of other agencies, the MBTA is part of kind of this larger transit network. Right? We're not Metra in Chicago where we are a standalone thing where we make our own decisions. We want to be part of a network, right? So we want to make sure that funding is going to make sure we're improving the buses, which have been our most crowded source of travel right now, mode. So we're using it. We're bringing all that funding back in to make sure that we can repopulate projects, that we can run adequate service up and down the line. We're also trying to make sure we are ready to add back service as that need starts to present itself in a really intelligent way. On the commuter rail network, on the regional, we know right now that ridership is low, and we want to make sure that we are positioned such that we can think about when it's right to bring back additional service. And I've talked to Dave about this and Dave's bosses about this, that do we add in more express trains and then have more locals going forward? I mean, what we want to do is really bring back something that maybe isn't exactly what we used to do, because we used to just really be a peak focused, largely peak focused service that brought people into Boston in the morning, brought them home at night. That was most of what we did. I think we now know that there's going to be a lot of people, and this was happening before the pandemic. We were talking about what this service should become, and that's part of what Rail Vision was. And so we really want to be building back in that method where we are kind of bringing people in who want to go to, if my mom wanted to go to the MFA, I don't think she would normally think about taking the rail service, right? Because it may get her in the morning, may not get her in the afternoon, or vice versa. We want to be someone who can really meet all those different needs for healthcare trips, for education trips, for recreational trips. And so what we want to do is take the funding we're going to be getting and intelligently over time building back the service, but using the goals that Alistair pointed out earlier, which is kind of that, how do we spread the service throughout the day? How do we make sure that we're serving all these different needs, and not simply go back to necessarily what we were, which was great. Don't get me wrong. I think we ran a great service. I think we can really kind of evolve and do a better service.
Yeah, and it's Alistair. It came up in another one of the questions. I think there was put in the original applications. The intent is also to look at intra-zone journeys as well. I mean, we've got examples here. I happen to be in Salem, so on the North Shore, where people are actually traveling from station to station, either for education or visiting various facilities here in Salem. And they aren't traveling into Joston, or and there are other examples of reverse commute to So the intent is to serve all those markets in a more effective way, because up till now we've had a fairly fractured schedule. It hasn't been repeating, and it still isn't yet. We appreciate that. Some of that's due to infrastructure constraints, as we've already described. But we need to provide that framework to be competitive.
Thank you both of you so much. So I'd love to call on Matt Moran next.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Matt Moran. I work for the Boston Transportation Department. I lead a team there called the Transit Team. So we coordinate closely with the MBTA, mostly on bus priority issues, but obviously also on commuter rail. So I had the pleasure of being on the commuter rail vision task force, I guess, going back now 2 years ago. And really excited to see this moving forward. I guess the one thing I would maybe ask or add is, just as we think through this, to not lose track of the Fairmount line. Just from the standpoint of equity, it's 1 in every 5 Bostonians lives within a 10-minute walk of a Fairmount line station. A lot of the communities along the corridor are, communities where equity is a key concern. For example, residents of Mattapan typically have like a 45-minute one-way commute compared to a typical Bostonian who has about a 28-minute commute. So big disparities in travel times for some of these neighborhoods. And then secondly, too, I would also say from like sort of our planning for the city, it would be good to sort of think through an aggressive timeline for what we could see on the Fairmount line. We're thinking through things like, housing and displacements. We're thinking through what we're going to do with our roads for bus improvements and bus priority. And all these things could have some effects with, what happens on the Fairmount line. So eager to work with you guys and excited to see what comes next.
Thanks, Matt. The city's been a great partner. Obviously, we're really excited about the Fairmount line. It is, our board, when they were prioritizing the Providence line, obviously, because it's already electrified, is sort of the natural, but then Fairmount and the environmental justice corridor, because we know there's lots of people who maybe are transit dependent. There's been a lot of equity issues over time, and we really want to make sure we're serving those. Kind of excited to say on the Fairmount line with the new schedule, I believe I'm going to get the percentages off a little bit, but it's about 85% more trains than we were running the fall of 19, kind of pre-COVID. So it's not everything it wants to be. And I think getting those last 2 stations to be high-level platforms are something that we're talking about a ton, because that will give us, I think, the ability to kind of run that service much more smoothly. There are some engineering challenges there, but actually, to be honest with you, we've been talking about, any way we can solve those problems, maybe in some more creative ways in the shorter term to make Fairmount even a better service. And then frankly, I talk to Kat Benish all the time, how do we make sure that we coordinate that? Because maybe that, again, either frees up some buses or we can figure out ways to make better connections, because that's a better all-day service. And so, but Matt, please, feel free to reach out anytime, and we are super excited to work with the city to make Fairmount even better.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to go back to some of the chat questions. Would you like to talk more about how do you plan to interact with freight rail when frequencies grow?
It's a great question. I mean, freight's a real constraint, right? And it's a great constraint because we want a really vibrant freight rail network, because it gets trucks off the road and makes a lot of movements that we really need to have happen. But it is something, again, when I go back to talking to Brian about boring problems, like it is one of those things that we need to recognize that we do need to have to accommodate, a robust freight network. And I think we were just looking at this recently. I think on every line, there is a freight provider who has operating rights. I'm not sure every line gets a lot of freight traffic, but every line has someone who can be operating. So, we do talk to our freight partners, to CSX and Pan Am, to Grafton and Upton. Actually, Ryan Caholen in my office is kind of created a working group to make sure all the relevant railroads are speaking. I think it's going to be monthly to make sure they are coordinating, because we do want them all to be working well. So I'm not positive I answered your question, but I think it is something that making sure, and it does impact kind of design standards and a lot of things we do want to do. Alistair, I feel like you're gonna jump in and say
Yeah.
something smarter than what I'm saying.
Quick, well, not so smarter, but I would say some of the no regrets investment are intended to give benefits to ourselves to some degree, but also part of that actually benefits freight. So, for example, the Ballardvale example I mentioned earlier,
That's a great one.
that is a freight line. And actually we're leveraging some freight lines too, but there are other ones where we're talking about station reconfigurations like LOL, which we need for ourselves for rail transformation. But that also, again, benefits freight and actually just separates the two bits of track. And then there are other cases where we're putting in passing tracks again, so our higher frequency service can work. But again, that also benefits freight. And if we're talking, which one is it? Be the Lowell line probably is a good example. There we're talking about putting in a turn track, which takes us off the main track, which benefits both freight and the Downeaster in that case. So that's Amtrak too. So by improving our own network, we're also helping freight and limiting the conflicts. The hard one, I think we mentioned earlier, is the Fitchburg line, where there is an awful lot of interreaction. And then the other one's the Grand Junction, which we use to move between the north and south sides of the network, which again, single track, that's never going to be anything other than single track. And to the extent freight's on that, it makes our lives quite hard. But as somebody's just mentioned, the addition of a south side heavy maintenance facility would reduce that traffic going from the north side to the south side.
Thank you so much. And so I want to make sure we have a ton of questions in the chat. So with the short amount of time we have left, I'd love to get to them as much as possible. So I'd love to send up a bunch. And then if we do have time, we could do some more in-person questions if that works. So a follow-up on EMUs. Can the existing electricity grid handle adding multiple EMU trips on multiple lines throughout the region?
I'll jump in because that's part of our current study. I don't want to talk to it too much, but we are talking both with National Grid and Eversource. That is part of our planning for the Northeast Corridor, but we're also taking a holistic view. The T is already engaged because we're also looking at bus electrification. There's a potential for a lot of consumers hooking up to charge EVs. So the grids, to give them their due, they're already, the utilities, they're already reaching out to all potential users and looking at improving their facilities because they see this coming. So.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is going to be there's going to be a lot of people who want to get onto the grid to run these cleaner networks on the bus and subway side and bus and rail side. And so that's the challenge, and the opportunity is we are a big player, and we're hoping that we can help kind of dictate how some of that stuff moves forward, maybe get some better pricing and things like that. So it's it is Brian, going to be a challenge. I think that's your question, but I think it does have a good opportunity as well.
And I guess, sorry, the final layer on that is, yes, we did separately make sure that our sourcing is green, and that we'll be working, I think in future, maybe looking at being even more connected with our suppliers, maybe through PPAs or something different, but sorry, power purchase agreements. So there is a lot of activity in this area and planning.
So another question I'd love to ask is, could you talk more about what you're planning to do to improve stations?
So I'll go first. I mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but it's kind of several layers, and we're trying to work through our affordability and priorities on this. First issue for our operational piece is trying to get high-level platforms in line sequence so that we can change each line or segment of line that's operating to run high-level only. In the short term, that gives us benefit, shorter dwell times, different quicker loading, and the opportunity to use different equipment if we get there in the future. So there's a lot of potential operational benefits and safety benefits and accessibility benefits. So that's definitely a big priority, but we're not ignoring the other improvements, which are, station access. That's definitely a big program, but trying to find funds is a challenge, which is where we want to partner with everybody and try and look whether there are options off-site to improve those, whether that's, bus, pedestrian, or bike, as well as car, so car parking too still. And, maybe EV facilities at the car parks too, in terms of power hookups. Then we're also looking and trying not to forget about the other piece, which is just the quality level and the state of good repair of some of the stations. I noticed there was a comment about Gloucester earlier. You know, it's painful for us. We want to have a quality network. We want to have everything look clean and safe and well painted and you know, just pleasing. We don't want people to have to put up with, you know, aging infrastructure. So we're also trying to find cost-effective ways to access that. But we're never going to become a luxury service in that aspect. But we're definitely trying to find a way to fund that, whether it's Adopt a Station or some other station art programs or something to just brighten things up as well. So we don't want to miss out on that.
Thank you. So I have a question about frequency next. And Alon, this is around your question around the 45-minute frequency on Fairmont. So would you like to ask it out loud? I can unmute you now.
Thank you. So my main question is not about the proposal that you're having for future regional grid, which seems pretty good. It's the schedules that you put out. I think it was Keolis North and Keolis South, these two PDFs, where you're saying how much services are going to be on each line, and Fairmount is to get a train every 45 minutes all day, which seems not very good. I mean, first of all, it's on clock face, and second, Fairmount is a short line, right? It's 30 minutes end to end, so that line maybe should be even more frequent, right? So why is the frequency that's being proposed so low?
I don't know, Rob, do you want to go first or shall I go?
So I know that we, again, I think it's an area that as we keep building this out and we think we can do better headways, but I think we also do want to make sure that, you know, this is kind of more aggressive than we've been in the past in some ways. There are obviously a lot of deadhead moves that happen on the line. You know, there are inspections that happen over on the actual infrastructure. So there are things I think we're not quite there to significantly, although I'm going to say that I'm not a scheduler. I'm not going to tell you I could squeeze out every technical minute in there. So Dave Walker, I don't know if you could give a better, more coherent answer as to why this is where we think we should be right now.
I mean, it was partly, as Rob said, it's I think it's 8 more trains than were in total than was run on the Fairmont line in the past. The main reason was that when the April schedule was being come up with, of course, the overall cost challenge is to do this as efficiently as possible. And a 45-minute pattern on the Fairmont line can be done with generally throughout the day 2 sets of equipment. So it's a combination of maintaining a regular pattern, but doing it in a way that is generally as efficient as possible. And as Rob says, there are a couple of there are requirements at the moment for track patrols that have to be done in the middle of the day, and we have to time the service to allow that to be done. They do it with it's done with a sort of road rail vehicle and has to pass along in the gaps between the service. So there was a combination of factors, but it was principally getting the best service we can with the equipment that's available given the overall funding challenge.
Yeah, and just a final point is there are some infrastructure constraints still on the network at the end of the line where there is a single track section which makes the final turn quite slow. But you know, that's something we're working on to improve, just like the high level platforms at Fairmont and Reeville.
The other thing to add about Fairmont is since last May, there's been quite the Fairmont pilot started last May, and we've been doing a lot of work with a combination of our team, the MBTA customer experience team, on kind of aggressively promoting the Fairmont line, both using kind of conventional digital media, but also a lot of stuff with kind of community outreach. And part of that is obviously if the 45-minute service, if we do see the increase in ridership we're hoping for, that makes it, you know, it's slightly chicken and egg, but if you see ridership start to increase, it makes it a much easier case to be justifying more resources and a better frequency. So I think certainly, you know, we're doing as much as we can to try and promote ridership with that 45-minute pattern from April, just to start to see the benefits of these kind of regular service patterns.
Thank you so much. So our next question is, Is parking going to be addressed at the stations, or could you talk more about parking at the stations?
Yeah, so it's Alistair. I'll go first. Yes, that is part of rail transformation. So the approach will be a mixture of pricing-based, technology-based, and just capacity. The response, and I think the way we're looking at things, are kind of to split up stations by different areas and kind of potential demand and typology. So we'll have different approaches for park and ride stations, city center stations, and more walkable stations. And as a result, we'll be looking at capacity pre-COVID and how much it was used, and then just potential hinterland and what kind of future service it will be addressing and what kind of future market it will be addressing, and then prioritize that way and work out whether we want to invest more in that, whether we actually want to, in some cases, maybe use some of the land for TOD and mix it up and provide better bus access and pedestrian access instead. But we'll be trying to be very targeted about each of those stations and making sure that the solution fits the station. And then, as I mentioned before, because I think there's a separate point in the chat there as well, pricing will be part of that. So we've already moved to a model where stations are addressed individually. So I think we'll be trying to be more systematic about that, given the change in demand and where we want to obviously just attract ridership, but not cannibalize existing either. So.
And Alistair's point earlier, I mean, one of the reasons why we're here and one of the reasons you'll be continue to hear from us is that we really want to talk to all the different people who help get people around the region. Rather than focus on parking, we also want to know, I think I saw Mike Lambert. I mean, how do we work better with Brockton Transit? How do we work better with the 120 Business Council and everyone else to bring people to the trains and bring them back? I think what's one of the benefits of trying to move as much towards a clock face type schedule as possible, as we hope that makes it a little easier for people to say, I can get on this bus, get here, get on that train. So, we know we're not there. As I said, this will be an iterative process, but we definitely want to encourage people to access our stations in a lot of different ways. We know a lot of people are coming from relatively close to the stations. How do we keep improving bike access, walking access, et cetera? And then that land either not making it parking, because that's a pretty expensive proposition, or as Alistair was saying, does it become housing? Is there a way to bundle parcels together to have other opportunities? And so parking's part of it, but we're more worried about getting people there in a smart way.
Okay, I just want to do a quick time and agenda check. At this point, the remaining agenda items include the public comment and my colleague Ryan Hicks' presentation on the MBTA, on the MPO's new MBTA Park and Ride dashboard. I'd like to reverse those items. Maybe we can take a few more minutes and do the public comment section first, so we can continue to answer some more questions, and then around 2:41, 2:42, we'll transition over to Ryan's. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So Clark, would you like to ask your question?
Mute. Clark Fraser here. I live in Hingham, and I appreciate the new trains are being added so I can get into town to get to concerts. My main concern continues to be the single track. If peak hour ridership picks up again, will we lose that train? I mean, I would like to see, I know that it's an expensive problem to fix, but I'd like to see some movement towards fixing it. And the other gripes I have are the pay by phone. I really would like to see the using Easy Pass so that I could just drive into the lot, park my car, and not even think about it, and know that I'll be properly billed and won't get a dear violator letter later, because I don't use the commuter rail every day, but it really would use it a lot more if you keep that reverse train. But how can you do that, especially when you add South Coast Rail and you have the single track? So I also will point out that there's electric EMU cars running now in the Northeast Corridor on at least two or three different properties. I don't know why I couldn't bring a train of those up here for testing. But I think that they probably could just be run here by Amtrak and then you could run them and test them. So I don't know why we can't do this stuff immediately. The other thing is, I'd like to see in the train timetable, the Back Bay connections rather than having to go to a separate timetable. That's something you could do immediately because the MBTA service to Back Bay from South Station is so erratic, I can't depend on it. So somebody answer some of those questions, or am I being heard?
You are being heard. So we're always being heard. So I'll start with a few of the capital side of things, and we can talk about service in a minute. So certainly on the single track, that is one of our biggest issues. I think Rail Vision found it was one of the biggest issues. It is not an easy or cheap thing to solve. There have been some ideas over the years about how we might do that. At the moment, we're trying to think of ways of doing that just with existing equipment and sharing service. It doesn't mean a one-seat ride anymore if you do that. So that's why at the moment we're avoiding that.
Yeah, just let me jump in for a second. If you got DMU, diesel multiple unit cars, or electrify, why can't you at least do, I know it's not a good thing to do, have trains that split like at Braintree or at Quincy, so that you can run one train and you can cover 3 services.
I don't know if Dave wants to chip in on that one, but that is one of the things we were looking at. So.
Yeah, no, so I was just nodding, agreeing that where I worked before I came to Boston, that's exactly the approach, that we had recurring splits and attaches all day. The issue with that, of course, is that you need, for that to work, in this case, the Middleborough, Kingston and Greenbush lines, everything has to be provided with multiple units because it's very difficult to get those pairs of trains to match up. So it's the theory is a perfectly valid one and works, but it is a big investment to do.
Outbound is possible. I agree that inbound is a problem, and you should hire a consultant from Japan. They know how to schedule things like that.
So I'd love to make, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dave.
So the only other thing was, I think where you were touching on, there were 2 things. In terms of it, the single line being the biggest constraint, the April schedule, the initial plan we wanted was to have those 3 lines have a recurring pattern all day. But that was, as you'd expect, in the same way as the rail transformation study, the single line section from Braintree in towards Boston was what made that impossible. And so we got as close as we could, but it just isn't possible. Your last point was on the connections being shown at Back Bay. I didn't quite understand. Do you mean connections to the Orange Line, or did you mean connections between different lines?
What I want to do, when I go to town, generally, I do not want to go to South Station. I want to go to Back Bay, or I want to go somewhere else. Right now, I have to take the red line and then either the green or the orange. And it would be, the reason I don't take a train to Back Bay is because I don't know when they run. So why not put that in the schedule?
Okay, I understand.
And the other one I raised is parking. The parking is a mess right now with the pay by phone. I would suggest you get rid of it and use Easy Pass.
So I'd love to make sure we get a couple more questions with just the few moments we have. So thank you very much. So our next one would be, what are the implications for what are the implications for transformation investment given the 1-year capital investment plan? And can the regional rail deck be shared?
I don't think there's any negative implications on a potential. I mean, I think that whatever the CIP is going to be, whether it's 1 or 5 or however it gets framed, we'll be moving forward on a lot of the initiatives that we are trying to move forward. And I don't think that will necessarily slow us down in any way. In the same way, I don't think it'll slow down the other transformation initiatives either. It'd be great to know everything we're doing for the next X number of years, but I think we'll work within these within this reality. And again, I don't think it'll have a negative impact on us. As for sharing the deck, I haven't thought about it. I don't think it's an issue, but let me just double check. But I mean, it's very similar to the deck that I think is probably already online that was shared with the FMCB, as Alistair said, kind of maybe January 25th or something like that. So we'll just double check. But I anticipate that wouldn't be an issue, and we can make it available to Kate and Michelle, and you guys can distribute it as necessary if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I just want to remind everyone too, this video will be available on the Boston Region NPO YouTube channel, so you'll at least get to see the presentation again with the slide deck. So I have 1 minute for one more final question, if that works for
Sorry,
you all.
Kate, can I just,
Yeah.
one of the questions was when the Fitchburg line schedule will be available. So that will be available probably in the second week of April. Obviously, the Fitchburg line is sort of largely closed until May, but that'll be available, and the Fitchburg line service is more or less exactly hourly all day, just to sort of preview that. So just wanted to close that one out.
No, thanks so much, Dave. So my final question is, commuter rail towns are or will be developing more affordable housing units. Are there plans to make commuter rail passes more affordable so that the total cost of living is more manageable for low to middle income residents?
So, we don't dictate fare policy. It's a great question. And, this is something I think the T's been really wrestling with, trying to figure out the right way to handle this. We've been traditionally distance-based. Distance-based doesn't always handle all the equity issues I think that we all want to have addressed. And so, Rail Vision, if I remember correctly, kind of used a flat, maybe like $3.75, kind of a fare that was more than a subway fare. I don't know exactly what the regional rail fare will be as we move in that direction, but it's something we're very aware of. I think we're really kind of grateful. Alice and I were just talking earlier today about some of the cities and towns that are promoting better housing opportunities right by the train stations. And if you go, not all affordable, but just better options. If you go to Newton, you go to Waltham, you go to a lot of places these days, you see what's happening. I don't know enough about I think it's Lincoln maybe that the town mentioned, but it's great. We really want to encourage it. We want to be those people's ride of choice. And we recognize, and we've talked quite a bit about the fact that fares are something that we need to figure out going forward. I don't have an answer today, I'll be honest with you, but I think it's recognized as something that we do want to tackle, to make the service something that people do want to rely on for those regular trips.
Yeah, so and also it's out of our hands, but there's the study of means tested fares. We are, as in terms of fare products, are looking at off-peak fares, which I think would be effectively targeted at some more of the challenged communities, and it would be for different kind of rider. So hopefully that could be helpful, and also reverse commute as well, maybe looking at ways of targeting fares on a more specific basis that bring down the overall cost and make it more,
but in the long run, we'll have to come up with kind of a way of kind of, it's amazing. It touches so many different issues when you start talking about them. So we just want to make sure we do it in a really thoughtful way. But we do hear people when they say that it's something that and it is being kind of addressed by people who are very laser focused on it.
Hey, well, I want to thank our presenters, Rob Diadamo, Alistair Sowers, and Dave Walker for all the great information and great responses to questions that they've shared today. Just to let folks know, we will be sharing the chat messages with them after the meeting, so they'll have that feedback and information as well. And now at this point, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Ryan Hicks, to talk a little bit about a kind of a complementary item, which is the release of the MPO's new MBTA Park and Ride dashboard.
Hello, my name is Ryan Hicks, and I'm the manager of the congestion management process at the Boston Region MPO. And the reason why I'm here is to talk about our park and ride and bicycle parking data collection effort. This is something that's been done through the CMP for over 20 years now. We've actually had 5 different iterations of data collection in regards to park and ride data and bicycle parking data. We've actually did our first iteration of collecting data in 2000, then we did subsequent ones in 2005/2006, 2009, 2010, 2013/2012, and then our latest one was completed in 2017, 2018. And that's the one I'm primarily going to talk about today. For the sake of time, this is going to be an abbreviated presentation. And then after that, I'm going to do a brief demonstration of our new park and ride dashboard. So let's get started. Yes. So what we did was the purpose of this data collection was to evaluate the parking ride and capacity utilization that's available for general purpose parking. That means non-permit parking specifically. We're trying to appeal for the purpose of the memo, and most of the numbers that are referred to in this presentation, we're trying to appeal to people who need a parking spot at the last moment and just want to pay a sum of money and park at a certain location at a specific parking ride lot. We do collect permit-only parking. However, we do that analysis separately, and that analysis is in the memo as well. So we're looking at that, and we also try to analyze and make sure that the stations are accessible as well. For example, we assess if there's a ramp leading up to the station, or if there are accessible spaces near the station, or if there are sidewalks or crosswalks leading to the station as well. And then the third thing is, this is more of a new thing that I'll mention later on in the presentation, but we also want to look at the origin of where people are coming from to park at these parking ride lots as well. And this is a new thing that we're looking at. Next slide. So our typical methodology is that we have limited resources, so we are only available to collect for one sample day. So we try to find the best day. So the best day typically is a non-holiday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday, typically in the spring or fall. So for the last data collection effort, we did spring and fall of 2017 and 2018. This was a 2-year effort. It took us 2 years to examine every single MBTA station. We typically examine each station after the last inbound peak period train leaves the station. So if it's a rapid transit station, we typically examine the station at 9 o'clock a.m. We just assume that 9 o'clock a.m. is the last inbound peak period train. For commuter rail stations, we typically assume, we look at the MBTA schedule, and then we go by whatever that says as far as the last inbound peak period train. In addition to that, we actually surveyed lots at about 152 MBTA stations. Those are the ones that have parking. And we're able to look at bicycle parking for every single MBTA station, whether they have bicycle parking or not. And typically, we, as I mentioned before, we did one sample day per station. Next slide. Just to give you a little spill of what's in the memo, for example, this is an example map of what we have done based on our analysis. This actually shows the parking ride capacity and utilization of every single station that we monitored that has parking nearby. And this is both rapid transit and commuter rail. One thing to point out here really quickly is that all the terminus on the rapid transit lines are full at the end of the peak period, except for Riverside and Mattapan. However, on the commuter rail line, it's different. The only one that was filled, the only terminus that was filled at the end of the line, at the end of the peak period, was Rockport on the Newburyport Rockport line. And that was because that station happened to be under construction at the time. Next slide. Now, one of the main reasons why I'm presenting today is because I want to show off the park and ride dashboard that's debuting. This was created through our IT department, specifically Margaret Atkinson and Benjamin Krepp helped us create this dashboard from scratch. And what this dashboard actually shows is it actually has information on every MBTA station, and then it actually has parking on 152 MBTA stations, and has bike parking on every on every MBTA station. In addition to that, it also has different information such as amenities, such as are there bike lanes leading to the stations? Are there trails leading to the stations? Are there accessible parking? Is there accessible parking? That sort of thing. And it's based on a 1-day sample. Right now, it's just between 2017 and 2018, the latest information, the latest iteration of the data set is on there for now. And the data is available for download. Next slide. Now, here are the main steps. The first step that the next steps that we're doing is I'm doing it now. We're conducting outreach for the Park and Ride dashboard. We're trying to get the word out to see how much interest is in this topic. This is already the third presentation I've done on this subject matter. In addition to that, we have composed a blog that will be posted on our website shortly. So we're just trying to get let other people know that this stuff is out there. And then secondly, we have origin destination data for the first time ever. This is new to this data collection effort. We have it only at certain stations. So what we're doing is we're actually in the process of cleaning it up, and we're kind of putting our minds together to decide how we're going to display this data. But most likely what we'll end up doing is we'll either build a new dashboard or we'll add to this existing dashboard an element that will actually show where people are coming from to park at these stations by traffic analysis zone or TAZs. So that's the plan with that. And then the third thing is, as I mentioned before, we've been collecting this data since 2000. And we have 5 different data sets. So we'd like to look to see if we can add the other 4 data sets to this dashboard eventually as well. Right now, we actually have the old data sitting in an Access database, and we'd like to put these to it. So next, what I can do, I'll share my screen, and I can actually show you the Park and Ride dashboard, give you a brief demonstration. Okay. All right, so this is the Park and Ride dashboard. It's available on our congestion management process page. If you have the time, I recommend you go to the Boston Region MPO's CMP page and explore it. There's a whole bunch of resources, not just related to roadways, but also transit, park and ride lots, bicycle and pedestrian facilities as well. So if once you enter in the Park and Ride dashboard, you have a choice to select whatever base map you prefer. You can either do the Mass GIS or the OpenStreetMap. So for the purpose of this presentation, we'll just do the Mass GIS. Now, the next selection box, you can actually narrow it down because there's about 290 MBTA stations that are displayed in this dashboard. So it's often best to narrow it down by neighborhood, but you don't have to. But if you want to narrow it down by neighborhood or town, you just select this drop-down box and you could select the town. For the purpose of this demonstration, we can do Framingham. And then in there, it actually narrows the stations down to that community or that neighborhood. So only the Framingham station is selectable instead of 290 stations. So once you select the Framingham station, you can actually zoom in, and there are detailed polygons that actually show spatially where each of these lots are located. And each lot has a unique number as well. Which is called a lot ID. First, I'll go through the parking information. As you can see, each lot is entered in, and each lot might have different characteristics. Some of them are public lots, some of them are private lots, some of them are permit-only lots. So the first group actually, with these 3 columns, these actually indicate what's consistent in the memo, and most of the body of the memo is that we're looking at non-permit parking that is also non-accessible. So anybody who needs a parking spot at the last minute can drive up and park in these spots. And these are the statistics for those. Actually show the amount of parking spaces, the amount of occupied parking spaces, and the utilization. The second group actually shows all non-accessible parking spots, whether or not if they're permit only or not. So these second groups actually include permit only spaces possibly as well. And as you can see here, if there's a 0 here, or if there is a number here, that indicates that lot is permit only. The third group looks at accessible parking spaces. If you have a special sticker to park at a certain location. And then the fourth group looks at all parking spaces for that particular lot as well. And then at the bottom, all the totals are added up and displayed for each and every lot. And in addition to that, right here actually indicates who owns the lot. And also the last column actually indicates what the parking price was at the time of observation for that lot. So this is 2017/2018 prices, or in the case that's permit only, if it is permit only. All right, so real quickly, I'll do a couple more. We'll do Oak Grove. Okay, and this is the rapid transit station. As you can see, there are several lots, both public and private, nearby. And in addition to that, I'd like to also highlight that there is a station information section for every single lot, whether or not it has parking or bicycle parking at that lot. And what that does is actually has basic information such as station number, station code, which are like unique things to our CMP as far as identifying stations. It also displays specifically the number of bicycle spaces that are present and how many of them are filled at the time, how many bikes are filled at the time. And it also even displays what type of bicycle racks are at those locations. And if there are bikes parked at other locations, which might indicate that there's an issue with bicycles being parked near railings or to trees or to stop posts, which might indicate that there might need to be another bike rack installed or additional bike rack. And then in addition to that, things such as sidewalks leading to stations and crosswalks leading to stations is also indicated as well. So, and then the last thing is I want to show two more things. One is an example of a station that does not have parking. So we'll go to Fenway, and then we'll look at Kenmore. So if a station does not have automobile parking, if a station does not have automobile parking, it'll just display the bike parking data. And then lastly, if you would like to do your own analysis, you can actually click here and actually download. For this button, it'll download all the bike data for all the MBTA stations. And if you desire, you can actually do your own analysis as well if you want to do a special analysis for a study or something that you're doing, that you're working on yourself. In addition to that, you can do it for the MBTA parking ride lots as well. So, and then there's also a help section here that's very detailed. You can actually click here to go to the memo, which actually has a detailed analysis on the entire system and also a line by line analysis as well. So this actually concludes my presentation, but if you have any questions or comments, or if you have anything to share, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left, and I want to take just a question or two before we wrap up. And again, we'll share some staff contact information and some follow-up materials. So if you'd like to ask any questions to the staff later on, you're welcome to do that. We got a question from Sarah Lee. I'm just scrolling to this. She asked, the MassDOT mobility dashboard has 2019 versus 2020 versus 2021 commuter rail station parking comparisons. Could you explain how this may compare with the data in the MPO dashboard?
Okay, there might be several differences because I don't believe they're using our data set. They might be, they might have another data set directly from the MBTA. And if they are using a data set from the MBTA, that specific data set might only cover parking lots that are owned by the MBTA, which is not all parking lots that are near the MBTA stations. That's the first thing. Secondly, they're typically with the MBTA, they actually collect data all day. We're just looking at the peak period. So we're just trying to see what's going on, for our, in regards to the daily commute in the AM peak period. So the data could look different, especially the utilization in particular. Yeah, but that's the major difference, is that this data set will actually cover private lots as well that are nearby. We look at any lots that any MBTA rider would potentially use.
Well, thanks, Ryan. And I appreciate Ben Muller chiming in about the comparison data, with the MassDOT dashboard focusing on T-owned stations, as Ryan just mentioned, and also the MPO dashboard reflecting bicycle parking as well. I know we're 2 minutes past the hour, so I just want to close out really quickly with some final items. Matt, if you could advance the slides for me. One or two more. Thanks. So a couple of things will be following up after the meeting. There'll be a post-meeting email with links to the various resources we talked about today. There is a post-event feedback survey that we usually share to folks. We can make this available in the meeting as well. Your feedback on these events is really helpful to us. As we've mentioned throughout, the recording of this meeting will be made available on the MPO's YouTube page. We're definitely going to be sending out some information about that upcoming transit chat series I mentioned at the top of the meeting. And we can keep you all notified of notices about future transit working group meetings. And there's definitely ways on the MPO website that you can subscribe for ongoing notices about our meetings that we can make you aware of. So I want to thank all of our presenters and all of my colleagues for helping manage the meeting today, and all of you for attending and asking great questions and providing great comments. I hope you have an excellent afternoon.